To what extent is Kirk Cousins the ceiling on the Minnesota Vikings? Will their offensive line improve? Can the defense get back to its 2017 levels? These are the topics we're going to be talking about when we run through our state of the franchise for the Minnesota Vikings. Here with Eric Eager, I'm Sam Monson. Let's start off with the Kirk Cousins discussion, Eric, because that's got to be front and center when we're talking Minnesota Vikings. Just how much of the problem last year is down to Kirk Cousins?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it can be attributed to John DeFilippo. He's one of the worst offensive coordinators in our metrics last season. However, Cousins did have a fundamental shift. Basically the last dozen weeks or so of the season where we saw him have, almost NFL lows in terms of positively graded throw rates and negatively graded throw rates. He simply was not taking the chances that his predecessor, Case Keenum, did, taking advantage of those two really stud wide receivers on the outside. When you did that, you saw an offense that was too conservative, an offense that wasn't efficient in the bottom third in the league in terms of expected points added per play as a passing game, and one of the worst run games as well. And that put too much pressure on a defense that a season ago was one of the league's best, still one of the league's best, but it wasn't good enough to get them to the playoffs last year.
Yeah, I think ultimately the Kirk Cousins thing comes down to his grade overall was more or less the same as it's been the past few years. We got pretty much the same Kirk Cousins as we've seen every other year of his career. He's just being judged against that $84 million contract, which kind of puts unrealistic expectations on what he can do. I think if there's one fair criticism, it's that, as volatile a player as he is, he's going to have those games where he's pretty spectacular. And he didn't really pull them out in the most critical times for the Vikings last year. If there's one area where I think it's fair to criticize him, is that he didn't come up with one of those big performances when it mattered most.
Yeah, against the great teams, right? When you need one of those primetime games where he really plays well to get them into the playoffs, he really has struggled there. And I think, while his grade was similar as years past, it wasn't necessarily the same composition. He wasn't making downfield plays. He wasn't turning the ball over too much. Maybe that's because of the pressure that Mike Zimmer puts on him to take care of his defense by not turning the ball over and all that. But oftentimes you do have to spend money to make money on offense, and Cousins was simply unwilling to the last 10 to 12 games of the season.
So if Cousins is this mid-tier quarterback somewhere, those guys need help around them to get the best out of them. Yep. They've got some impressive weapons in Minnesota. Obviously, Diggs and Thielen are fantastic. They should be able to improve number 3 and the addition of Irv Smith along with Kyle Rudolph coming back. This should be a pretty loaded receiving core. But what about the offensive line? Can that improve and give Cousins the best platform to succeed on?
Yeah, it's tough to say because oftentimes a quarterback is his pressure, right? We saw with Case Keenum. Case Keenum faced pressure at a similar rate to Cousins the season before, but he just handled it differently, right? He gave chances to those wide receivers on the outside. Cousins not so much. So while I do think that they did improve with Garrett Bradbury going to center, Pat Elflein moving out to guard, where maybe he's a better fit. Brian O'Neill, second season, probably a little bit better because he came in a little slight last year. I do think the offensive line will be better. They probably will be at least a little healthier as well. But the question is can Cousins take that and give himself lower pressure rates, give his offense with the aforementioned weapons a chance to succeed?
Yeah, I think the important thing about this offensive line is that it doesn't need to get great. It just needs to get okay. Right. It just needs to stop being a liability and stop being the reason that the passing game sometimes sputters for the Vikings. I think it's got the capability of doing that. The potential is there at least. We'll see how it pans out over the course of the season. Let's move to the defense now, where, as you said, this has been a very good unit for a few years, but back in 2017, it was one of the best, if not the best, defense in football. Last year, we saw a bad season from Xavier Rhodes, really nowhere near his best. A relative bad season from Harrison Smith. We obviously had Everson Griffin miss some time away from the team. Can this defense get back to where it was, or was that an overachieving season?
Yeah, I mean, in 2017, the league was different, right? Because a lot of quarterbacks got hurt. The benefits of being one of the top 2 defenses as they were was far higher, right? As you step over to 2018, most of the quarterbacks are healthy. Being one of the best defenses, you're still going to get roasted like they did on Thursday night against the Los Angeles Rams. You're still going to have a tough time against New Orleans. You're still going to have a tough time against New England. So the benefits of being a great defense are simply not as high nowadays. However, they do have some of the goods, right? Obviously, Harrison Smith, a down year for him, but still a terrific player, probably one of their top three players, Xavier Rhodes, same thing. If they revert back to their career averages, they're probably going to be solid there. The question mark becomes how do they, deal with the interior pressure because Sheldon Richardson's gone. He went to Cleveland. Linval Joseph's a year older. Can they produce that pressure on the interior? Because ever since Griffin's getting a little older, Danielle Hunter's going to be the focus of a lot of teams' offensive lines. So can they get pressure? Because on the back end, they're starting to get either old or young. And for the players like Mike Hughes, Mackenzie Alexander, even Trey Waynes, they're going to need a little bit of help from the pressure up front.
Yeah, their depth up front is suddenly looking a little bit sparse. They really need a guy to kind of come from the rails out of nowhere and provide them with a significant amount of pressure.
Yep.
Look for a guy like Hercules Mataafa. Surprise name, went undrafted.
Yep.
We really expected him to be, a mid-round draft pick who was an incredibly productive college player. Missed all of last season injured, but has been, tearing it up so far in the non-padded portion of the offseason. Let's see what happens when the pads come on and he gets to play a little bit inside. He could be a nice rotational body.
Yeah, Zimmer's always liked to take guys who are like sort of end-type players, play them on the inside.
Right.
Michael Johnson, who was in Cincinnati, and Brian Robinson until he retired a season ago. So that's the role they're really looking for there because as of now, Richardson was very productive from a pressure standpoint last year, not necessarily a sack perspective. So it was a little bit bad for them to let him go. Do we see them maybe blitz Anthony Barr more? Do we see Eric Kendricks sort of take that role as more of a coverage player? Do we see Eric Wilson and Ben Gideon play a little bit more linebacker and Barr sort of as a sub-package defensive lineman? They've always hinted at that, but they've never really done it. Maybe that's something they can do to get creative and generate. As we start to see this defense lose piece by piece, get a little bit older, they probably have to get a little bit more creative in order to produce the pressure that they had in the past.
So there we go. That's going to do it for our Minnesota Vikings state of the franchise. A lot of question marks for this team, but the talent is still there for them to make noise and ultimately head to the playoffs where they want to be. Make sure you check out the rest of this series on YouTube. Hit like, hit subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.